Welcome to Elemental Energy, the podcast where we discuss how to simplify decarbonization. Here, we will introduce emerging low-carbon energy technologies and give you insight on how to navigate and support the evolving energy landscape. It is our goal to develop content to give you confidence to help transition the market and make low-carbon energy reliable and affordable. I'm your host, Marcia Leonard. So, continuing our conversation from the last episode on energy security, I am joined today by the Honorable Jeffrey Merrifield to discuss the IEA, or the International Energy Agency's definition of energy security, which is the uninterrupted availability of energy sources at an affordable price. Before we get started, I wanted to level set for everybody here just who is Jeffrey Merrifield. And I'm not sure why the title of Bruce Willis of Energy came to my mind, but the more I researched him and the more that I've learned about what he's done in the energy sector, I see that it's so fitting. He's not only a man who was sworn into the Nuclear Regulatory Committee by President George Bush himself to serve as commissioner for the UN, or the USNRC, but the impact that he has had in this industry and is continuing to have is so powerful. And Jeff, it's an absolute honor to have you here today.
Well, Marcia, it's great to be here, and I'm honored by your effusive comments, and I hope I live up to them.
I think you already have. I really enjoy looking back into your history and seeing the impact that you have had, and I hope you get to share a little bit more of that as you introduce yourself a little bit further, please.
Yeah, my background, I started as a mere Senate Hill staffer a long time ago, and I was honored to have been appointed and confirmed as the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commissioner. I did it for almost 9 years, and during that period of time, I managed to get to half of the world's 440 nuclear power plants in 30 of the 31 countries that operate them. So I have a long and deep understanding about how the current fleet operates. From there, I went to work for a company, the Shaw Group, that actually built them. So I got to understand a lot about engineering, construction, and maintenance of those units. And since 2015, I've been the head of the nuclear law practice at Pillsbury Law. We're the oldest and largest nuclear law firm in the world. And my specialty areas these days are advanced nuclear technologies and fusion. I represent the Fusion Industry Association. So I tell people I'm both left brain, right brain, left brain being fission, and right brain being fusion. So it makes for an interesting day.
I'm super interested in what an interesting day for a lawyer in the nuclear profession looks like. Just give us a high level overview.
Well, we're fortunate enough. It's a big diversity of things that we're working on. And so, the morning might start with a conversation with a NRC commissioner. I might have a hearing I have to do. I recently testified in front of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee about nuclear and where they thought things were, where I thought things were headed. Might be talking to a company that's involved in, remediation of mining waste in the afternoon. And then an evening phone call with my friends in Japan talking about, other advanced nuclear technologies. So we have a practice that ranges across 6 continents. We have utilities, developers, countries. We represent a number of countries. And I do a lot of work, which I find quite, enticing in the policy space. So I represent several non-governmental organizations that are supportive of carbon-free generation coming from nuclear power and other forms. And it's neat because you can sort of see the development of policy issues, and some of these organizations have really driven them. And since the time I've been here at Pillsbury, there have been a lot of changes in the way that nuclear is perceived, and a lot of changes in the way in which it's regulated and supported in the U.S. government. It's been great to watch.
That's great to hear that it's evolving in that way. So before we get into the discussion, I like to do kind of a round of Q&A called Did You Know? And if you know the answer, I think that you will know a lot of these answers. Please feel free to elaborate on them. Are you up for it?
Sure.
Okay. Did you know global electricity consumption is forecasted to increase 50% by 2050?
I'm surprised it's that low. I would have thought it'd be higher than that.
Did you know that Climate Trace, which is an independent greenhouse gas emissions tracking tool, was recently rolled out and released this last month in order for people to go and check who is emitting and where?
I didn't know that particular one, but I'll tell you, I think I don't know enough about that particular tool. But if there is a tool out there that will give people an ability to do that, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, it was really impactful pulling it up because you can sort by different countries. You can sort by different categories, be it industrial, agricultural, and see the emission impacts that they're actually outputting. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion about those kind of things while I was at COP, and I have to say, transparency is generally a pretty darn good thing. When people get more access directly to the facts and the data, I think it helps people be more well informed about what's going on. I mean, in COP, there's a lot of talk about people doing things. With tools like that, you can actually see whether they're doing what they say. I think in that regard, and then I'll let you go to the third question. I mean, the United States gets criticized about the fact we haven't done as much as folks think we ought to do on carbon reductions. But when you look at the facts about how much we have reduced the U.S. carbon footprint, even with things as simple as getting rid of iridescent lighting and going to LEDs, it's been meaningful.
I love to hear you say that it has been meaningful. And I'm glad you just mentioned COP because as you and I were discussing beforehand, the did you know question I have is, did you know accelerating nuclear has been issued in the final text from recent COP28 climate summit? Some countries even pledging to triple their nuclear power by 2050.
Yeah, 24 countries pledging to triple their nuclear production. It's very exciting. And I think we'll see more countries join on board. And I just got out of a meeting with a think tank here in DC, which was talking about, Africa. How do we deal with the 600 million people in that continent who represent 75% of the people in the world who do not have access to electricity? How do we address that? And then obviously, wind and solar are going to be a big part of it. But there was obviously, I think a lot of folks were saying, yeah, we do believe that nuclear needs to be part of that as well. And so not only do we have countries that are going to triple their production, but we're going to have a lot more countries that are going to use that and really ramp up.
I think that's an absolutely excellent segue into our very first question of the discussion is, what is energy security?
Well, at the end of the day, energy security energy is the most important element we have in bringing forward human civilization. The ability for people to do what they need to do at any hour of the day, the ability to keep, and we take this for granted, having food that is safely kept in refrigeration. I mean, there's lots of people around the world who have food poverty in large measure because they don't have access to reliable electricity. The ability to decarbonize. Electricity is going to be the enabler of all these electric vehicles, of all of these other opportunities to decarbonize. But it's got to be in a manner where people can have the confidence that whether they turn on the lights, whether they plug in their hybrid, more importantly, for industrial purposes, if you've got a data center, you have to have 99.9999 reliability. You can't do that with sources that don't have 100% reliability. And that's where nuclear is really part of the game.
So, I mean, we're starting to touch on it, but overall, how is the electrification movement really impacting energy security? You just mentioned EVs and different things like that, but go into it a little bit further. Like, what are we seeing from the electrification movement that's making our energy security maybe not so strong?
Well, I think there's a couple of elements of that. I mean, I think in the Western world, we have a fairly wide transmission network that is established, well understood, and been there in a long-standing way. And the reliability of that transmission network is directly related to the type of transmission assets, the type of generation assets that you have on that transmission grid. Historically, in order to keep a balance in the system, to make sure that the voltage stays at a reliable level, you need reliable voltage for electrical equipment, computer generating equipment, and other things. we've relied on inertia, right? The movement of turbines and generators, which provide that sort of rolling capacity to keep that grid stable. As we change to a grid in which we are adapting more intermittent resources, wind and solar, the amount of that spinning inertia is being reduced. And so the potential for instability of the grids in the Western world has increased. How we address that in the developing world, or in the global South, I guess we would now call it, how we address that in the global South is going to be important, because as they are adding transmission grids, we're going to have to think about how do you plug in the right resources that are going to provide that stability to the cities that need it. Lagos is a good example. They're going to soon be, Nigeria is soon going to be the third largest country in the world by population, surpassing the United States. They need reliable power too, and they rely very heavily on diesel to get the kind of services that they need. That's not a great way of doing it. But so we're going to have reliability for those grids that are being built out, and we need to figure out for those parts of the world that aren't electrified, if you've got a microgrid, what's the best way to operate that and provide the power that those people need? Simply having enough power to plug in your phone that's not a success story. People want to plug in their phone, but they also want to plug in their refrigerator. They want to have, at least one room in the house where if it's 110 degrees, they got an air conditioner to keep themselves cool. So those all sort of play into that mix. And for those people in those circumstances who are in rural Africa, reliability means for them that they have the ability to make sure that they're not going to be subject to rolling blackouts, which is the circumstance that many of them live with right now.
It's amazing. Like, we really are so blessed. And when I look at the things that we are afforded just by energy, like, think of all the people who have missed out becoming something great because they're not even able to do their homework at night because they don't have light switches to flip on in order to read their books.
Well, I think, having visited Africa on a number of circumstances and seeing just the enormous potential there, and the fact that electricity can help enable that potential to the extent you said. I mean, there are children in that region who could be, the next, Linus Pauling or the next Bill Gates or the next whatever. I mean, but they've got to have the infrastructure to really bring that out. It's very hard to learn and to move forward if you simply can't do your work when you need to do it.
Agree. So let's bring it back to the United States. What are some major shifts needing to occur in order for us to achieve stronger energy security here in the United States?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. We have already built out some of our most productive areas for wind power, for example. And there are challenges right now. I think there was a lot of folks that thought we would be building out a lot of wind particularly on the East Coast, in off-coast installations. Some of that has gone away. We're going to have to really put additional focus on our own grid to make sure that we can bring that power in. If we put more wind into certain parts of the rural Midwest, we've got to have the capacity to bring that out. Transmission is a hard thing to site. Right. There are a lot of folks who do not want a big transmission tower going through their backyards or near their homes. And so that's a real challenge as we're trying to decarbonize. We've got to have a way to move that electricity. And so that's going to be an issue. The other one is, we're, to the extent that the world is going to increase its power as predicted by your question by 50%, there's a potential for the U.S. to do it in an even larger way. And so that means that much more energy we're going to have to produce. When you think of data centers, so we have in the United States, in Loudoun County, in the state of Virginia, there's a massive build out of these data farms, Amazon, Google, Meta, and others, thousands of megawatts of potential additions, and they just simply don't have the connections right now to do it. And so we're going to have to get the right generation there. They can't use they cannot use an intermittent source of power to make it happen. And so what we're seeing today is they're evaluating what can we do behind the meter. Is it small nuclear? Is it some other fossil generating system that may capture the carbon so you can be zero carbon neutral? A lot of different options out there. I sort of sum it all up. I think with the recent passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, there's going to be funding of a lot of initiatives and a lot of innovation. And I think it's going to be interesting to watch.
Now, I agree to that wholeheartedly. You almost started to touch on it when it came down to the US. Like, help educate me. Does the United States have a larger role in like the global scheme of energy security? Like, where do we sit in all of this? Is it the innovation happening here to spread out to others? Just give me an overview.
Well, I do think in innovation, the United States is going to be able to be a leader. Having worked with a number of technologies over the years and watching some of and I learn every day new technologies that are being developed here, many of which are enabled by government support, including tax incentives. I think that innovation, is first going to be located here in the United States, but I think those initial deployments will get a lot of the issues settled with how do you build them, where do you locate them, how are they used, how do we fine tune it so they work most effectively. And I do think that other areas of the world, including the global South, will be able to take advantage of that because they will be in a position to take on board, the third, fourth, fifth, sixth units or more that have the experience so that when they say, yeah, we want to build, whether it's a nuclear power plant or a plant that can capture carbon when it produces its electricity, they'll be in a position to buy an asset that's got a track record and will work. And so I think that's one area of leadership the United States certainly can take. The other one, I think, and again, a lot of my opinions are colored by the fact that I spend most of my day working on nuclear power. But I went to a conference several years ago down in Kenya. And it was a conference focused on countries in that continent that would like to use nuclear power as part of their means of generating electricity in a secure and reliable way. And I've frequently had conversations with folks saying, we really want the Americans to be here. We know we've got China, we know we've got Russia knocking on the door, but we just don't have that confidence of the reliability of those two countries as partners. And so, dating back to when the U.S. originally was deploying nuclear energy under President David Eisenhower, I think today the U.S. remains at the sort of I hate to use the word gold standard, but we're certainly a leader in providing those types of technologies, but doing so in a way where they feel that they can rely on us for ultimately what's going to be an 80 to 100-year relationship that goes along with operating those assets. So to get back to the heart of your question, I think the U.S. can lead with innovation. I think the U.S. can lead with relationships. And I think together we can help others outside of our country also achieve that energy reliability and security that they're looking for.
It was such a powerful statement that you just said, that they would rely on us versus China or Russia for the nuclear relationship side of things. And it made me think China and Russia are pretty far advanced when it comes down to their nuclear output and capacity. But didn't they adopt their regulations based off of the US NRC regulations? Am I correct?
Well, I think, okay, so let's sort of parse that just a little bit. I mean, both of them, and I want to say up front, I think that both China and Russia do build nuclear power plants that, as far as I can tell, are safe. They, in the Russian regard, they have their own regulatory system. I'm sure in some parts of it may have been influenced by the U.S. system, but for the most part, I think that's one of their own doing. The Chinese, I have some more familiarity with when they made the commitment to purchase the Westinghouse AP1000. There was an interchange between the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the Chinese regulator, and I think there were a variety of regulatory decisions that were made to adopt much of the American approach there. So I think in that regard, I think probably China is a bit further, probably a little bit closer to the U.S. system, although admittedly it's been a long time since I've looked at that carefully. I would say one of the difference in how you approach the sort of the three countries. Russia offers an all soup to nuts approach. We'll sell you the fuel, we'll sell you the plant, we'll sell you the services to reprocess the fuel. It's the Russians have entered into some countries that I think the United States probably would have had a hard time doing, or at least the U.S. companies would have had a hard time doing. I didn't see a line of U.S. companies that wanted to build a nuclear power plant in Bangladesh or Egypt or Belarus. So, I think we do have some hand wringing about the Russians taking on projects, but some of those are projects that we certainly, I don't think we would necessarily have done. There are a lot of other areas in the world, though, that need nuclear generation and are concerned about a reliance on Russia. And I think the other thing about the Russians, I think with energy security and relying on them as a partner, I think has been demonstrated is not a good choice given what's happened in Europe and in Ukraine in the last 600 plus days. China, I think that story's yet to be told. I think the one thing you can take on Chinese nuclear programs or Chinese power programs is they will, if they cut a deal, they're going to bring everything in. They're going to bring in all the parts and pieces. They're going to bring the entire workforce. There's not the same opportunity for local development and workforce development and providing some of the parts and pieces of those reactors. And I think that is where the U.S. has a different outcome. And every one of the U.S. nuclear providers that I engage with recognize it's not just selling a nuclear power plant and going away. How do you come in? How do you engage with the workforce to create a self-sustaining program? How do you find parts and pieces that country can provide on its own, so it's got some degree of localization, and have it be a more sustainable program? And I think that's one of the areas where the U.S. has a clear advantage.
I like that. I'm thankful to hear that we do have that working for us when it comes down to how we implement those like project management skills, even because project management is not transferable. You can send a design someplace and they could copy it, but the PM side, that's not. You have to learn that.
You do. And it's one of these, and I think the UAE is an example of this, and that was, albeit a Korean built plant, originally U.S. design, but there was an opportunity for the folks in the UAE to learn along the way. And so ultimately, when that construction project is complete, the UAE will have a workforce that is made up of, majority citizens of the UAE who will be able to operate and maintain it, and that's a good outcome.
Okay. We started talking policy very early in this conversation, but explain the policy that surrounds nuclear and why is it so hard to gain approvals for new nuclear in this realm?
Well, I think nuclear's been around now for a long time. We're talking about systems that are 60 plus years old, or not the systems, but we've been building civil nuclear power plants for over 60 years. And in the beginning of the program, it was relatively straightforward. And then there were, admittedly, there were accidents, and there was a need and a desire to ratchet up the system to make it more comfortable for the people who surround the plant. That we're gonna have a regulatory regime that's going to provide a level of security that these plants are going to be adequately protected. I think one of the issues with regulators who have a degree in engineering is this notion of, well, we have to sort of constantly improve. And we got something good, but let's add to it. And I think this was a struggle we had when I was a commissioner in the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The Atomic Energy Act in our country says that you really need to create a regulatory system that can assure reasonable assurance of adequate protection of public health and safety. Those are sort of the magic words. And what that ultimately, in my view, and I think it's ultimately the right call, is there is a point at which you got to say, if we've reached adequate protection, we don't need to come up with new regulations. And so it's a struggle among the regulators because, you like to constantly improve, but there is some point at which you got to say, drop the pen. What we have is sufficient, and we need to make sure that we apply it in a way that's not going to unnecessarily deter the ability to use the peaceful uses of atomic energy. Again, part of the original Atomic Energy Act under President Dwight David Eisenhower. So it's a bit of a struggle. The regulators want to, always want to try to keep improving, but the folks who are deploying the plants want to do it in a way that's measurable, repeatable, transparent, and efficient. And those sometimes come into conflict. I would say, we had an announcement today that Kairos, which is a Oakland, California-based advanced reactor developer, just got their construction license for their Hermes reactor from the Regulatory Commission. That's a great sign that in fact we can move these things forward, and hopefully there'll be more to come.
So, to summarize energy security, it sounds like it's only going to become stronger and better the more nuclear that we are able to implement into the United States. Is that safe to say? Fair assumption?
Well, that would be my personal opinion. I mean, I think, can we triple the amount of nuclear energy we produce here in the United States? We could. I think the jury's out on whether that's the right number or not. But I think we could certainly double it. And if we're going to be, able to eliminate, our previous reliance on coal units, a lot of that's been shut down, but we still do have operating coal units in the United States. We have a lot of reliance on natural gas. If we are to address those fossil-based fuels, and we want to maintain a grid that is reliable and can meet the needs of data centers and manufacturing and chemical processes that have to run 24/7 and can't deal with intermittency, nuclear is definitely going to be a growing part of that. And what we learn here and the technologies we deploy here are readily available for export to countries around the world that are seeking that level of security as well.
What can we do to support the NRC to help them meet this goal of tripling nuclear? Like, how can we help them achieve such a feat?
Well, I think that Congress is going to be key to that. One area is I think there's going to have to be congressional oversight is good. It helped me when I was a commissioner. Congress wanted us to keep moving. Congress wanted us to have deadlines, enforce those deadlines, move forward in an efficient and transparent way. And I think that level of support would be helpful to the commission as well. Recognizing the U.S. Congress has appropriated billions and billions of dollars to support the deployment of advanced nuclear technologies. Congress needs to make sure that in order for that investment to be wisely used and done in a way that's straightforward, they're going to have to make sure that the regulator is effective and efficient. And the NRC's got a little bit of work to do there. Now, the flip side of it is, if we get the level of nuclear that we anticipate and what is called for in the recent agreement through the COP, the NRC is probably going to need some additional resources to make that happen. And I think one of the challenges they're facing right now is, if you come out of an engineering school or a nuclear engineering school in the United States, pretty attractive to go work for the advanced reactor developers. Being an NRC regulator isn't necessarily at the top of your list. And so the NRC is going to need to be a bit more, they're going to need to be reinforced in their ability to attract, talented women and men to come work for them. And that's probably one that's going to need some attention as well.
So, Jeff, Elemental Energy's audience they're people who are already in the energy transition space, and they know a little bit about different topics. There's not a lot of SMEs, but a lot of the audience is also conventional energy, like the conventional oil and gas people who are looking to possibly transition into this space as well. Do you have any final words for our audience when it comes down to energy security and helping them understand that this transformation space that we're undergoing is happening and how to help them along into this world?
Well, let's start with our friends from coal plants. I mean, I think we are at a point where we will see in not too distant future a transition away from coal as a generating asset. There are various studies that have occurred that have demonstrated that those facilities would make terrific locations for advanced nuclear generation. For example, West Virginia, which repealed a ban on nuclear, is looking to put that in several locations to address the power needs of the steel industry and others in West Virginia. The individuals who work at those plants could certainly, whether they're working in the control room or whether they're working in the maintenance shop, those are people who could be retrained to operate those nuclear assets. So that's a real opportunity at a variety of locations around the country, and would allow us to take advantage of all of the assets currently there: transmission, switch yards, water intakes, a whole bunch of stuff that's already there, and it help reduce the cost of deploying that new nuclear generation. For gas, this is one of the other takeaways for me from COP. There are a lot of efforts out there to try to figure out, can we come up with systems with carbon capture and storage that may be able to reutilize some of those assets, albeit continue to generate some degree of fossil generation, but nonetheless do it in a way that's not going to be contributing to our total global emissions, and using it for reinjection or simply sequestering it. And I think those are pretty exciting to me as well. So I think in the nearer term, when I say nearer term, in the next, probably 10 years or so, I think we are going to see more of those opportunities coming forward that hopefully will be, efficient, effective, and allow us to continue to use some of those assets as well.
Another big thing, like you were starting to touch on, retraining for, a similar position, just with a different power source, is what I have recognized is making the transition from conventional oil and gas into power generation is that all of your skills are absolutely transferable. And it depends on how you want to implement them. So with that being said, Jeff, is there anything else you want to close with when it comes down to our original topic of energy security?
Well, as Americans, there's a couple of tendencies we had. Winston Churchill once characterized Americans as, Americans will always do the right thing after they've tried everything else first. And there is a little bit of that has gone on. The other thing I would say is we are, as a people, relatively impatient. Americans probably have some of the highest ADD rates in the world, and the fact is none of this is going to be quick, and it's going to require time. It's going to require some patience. We're not going to shut down all of our gas plants tomorrow. It's just not going to happen. So how do we, as we work through our transition to an economy that uses less and less fossil energy and produces less and less carbon, there are going to be a variety of, I would call them off-ramps, where individual units or individual technologies will sort of be moving off. But as with any highway, you got the on-ramps as well. And I think people need to watch that carefully and prepare themselves because the skills that they have are translatable. We saw that there were a lot of folks that did nuclear work and then they went to work in fossil generation and have come back. And I think that's something we're going to see in this area as well.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for joining today, everybody. I hope you stay safe and, most importantly, happy. And Jeff, if you want to close everybody out, we would be happy to have you hear it.
Well, as a former nuclear regulator, I endorse what you say. Safety is the number one thing we need to worry about, and we want to go home safe at the end of the day. And so that's something that requires attention. With that, I wish everyone happy holidays.
Today's episode with Jeff really helped me affirm that nuclear is making a comeback. And it's making a comeback in such a way that people are recognizing all of the benefits that really surround nuclear. And one of those major benefits is energy security. With the increased energy production that we're going to have, everybody who is, like he said, plugging in their cars, plugging in their phones, plugging in their computers, those things are only going to continue to increase as population increases. And one of the best ways to help secure that energy need is through nuclear. So having people and the COP, the climate summit that just recently happened, state that they're going to be promising threefold nuclear by 2050 is just an absolutely amazing thing for me to be experiencing right now, because 2.5 years ago, it was pretty dismal for nuclear, but it's starting to seem bright. Thank you all so much for listening today. And if you hadn't become a member of the Elemental Energy group on LinkedIn, check it out. It's where we post the episodes, and it's also a community and forum for us like minded individuals to get together and have conversations. Take care.